Greetings, Tahini. This is an audio-visual recorded, time and date stamped in the archivable format for public notice. So I did a video recently going through this document here, the permanent mission of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to the Office of the United Nations in Geneva. In this document, basically the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is writing to the UN to ask for a response to the questionnaire on Human Rights Resolution E/HRC/RES/21/24 Human Rights and Indigenous People. So it's a response to a questionnaire. And I went through the whole document, read the whole thing, but I just want to go over some salient points as we move forward into another one that goes into some more details. But, the first sentence here, the United Nations has never given an official definition to the term indigenous people, right? That is a very qualifying statement there. They have never, because they cannot. Indigenous is based on self-determination. You see it here, self-identification as indigenous. So it's only a person would know, only a being would know if he or she is indigenous. Nobody can determine that for you. And also being accepted by the community as their member, being accepted to the indigenous community as a member of that community. The situation on this island, the community has been absorbed into the general population. So that aspect, it's just a matter really if you have friends, partners, people you just line with. That is your community, and if you are accepted, you would naturally be, because that is your community, so you would be accepted as part of that community. Historical continuity with pre-colonial and or pre-settler societies, all the things that we do, all our cultural aspects is a reflection of continuity with historical traditions. All our aspects, as we say, that is how the old people used to do it. I don't need to be more clear than that. That is how the old people used to do it. Strong link to territories and surrounding natural resources, well, that is just functioning off the land. That is all that means. Strong link to territories and surrounding natural resources. There's going to be beach, that is a strong connection to natural resources. So that we all, display that. Distinct social, economic, and political systems. We have distinct social systems. People just come from all over the planet to engage with our social systems because they enjoy it, and it's quite distinct. Economic and political, we all have that. And to be clear, our economic system is not about the mischief they're running in the central bank with the bond certificates and all these kind of things. It's just purely on an individual level. Your practices, how you make and move money and energize your economy, your personal economy, your finances, your operations. We have distinct methods of running our operations, our economic operations. Political systems, we have our political system. Even in the market, you could see the politics inside there. Don't go on the fish vendor side, well, then there's more politics inside there. Politicals is not to do with what the media describe as political. That is a foreign capitulation going on the land. There is an invasion war going on the land and masquerading as government. So it's seeming like policies and politics. But that is not politics. Politics is, going to the market with $20 and trying to get some fish. That is where real politics is jump out itself. And we have distinct political systems, distinct language, culture, and beliefs. Well, I need to go into that. Our dialect apparently is quite popular out there. You know, I just do a lot of research, and I look at instances where people of this island go and, you know, be interviewed by international celebrities, and they are generally spellbound by the dialect. They love it. It's quite distinct, you know, distinct culture. Well, I don't know if all need me to go into that. Doubles, men just fly from all over the world, and as they touch down, they work KFC. They need that, the feeling for the KFC, you know, that they're accustomed to. But it have a cultural aspect of this island that has been infused into that international brand that makes it one of the most popular versions of that brand, because our culture has been injected into it. Beliefs. Well, we have a whole set. You know, we even start to phrase them as think, like if it's we come up with it. You know, I think so. It's our belief, you know, and we have plenty beliefs, plenty, and distinct beliefs. We know things here that nobody else on the planet know. That is true. No, mama guy. Next one. Form non-dominant groups of society. Well, we know that sufferers like that form non-dominant groups of society. They're not in charge of nothing. A foreign operation running on the land calling itself governance, and they have all these international entities ravaging the people, raping and plundering the land. Rape refers to forced intercourse. Intercourse refers to business. So rape is forced business, and that is exactly what is going on the land. You know, coercion, brute force, and intimidation. So they are being quite dominant, quite dominated, and forming non-dominant groups of society. They also resolve to maintain and reproduce their ancestral environments and systems as distinctive peoples and communities. We'll be doing that every day. Everybody doing that every day. If it's just to figure out how to get from Sandy Granny to Port of Spain on the bus route in the most efficient, comfortable manner, that is resolving to maintain and reproduce your ancestral environment and system as distinctive people and communities. You know, the ancestral environment is the same environment we're in right now. Nothing has changed in that aspect. It's the same environment. We just maintain and reproduce ancestral environments and systems as distinctive people and communities. So, well, I misspoke there. Things change, you know, and it changed because of us. It's we who give it that distinctive aspect, all their systems, you know. Like I watching a video recently, we just say, when they're fixing the road, we say the Baba Green in the road. You know, we using that word like that. But that had nothing to do with the process, because nothing about the pitch name Baba and nothing green. You know, what they realize is the first set of machines that used to be doing the operation, the brand of the machine was Baba Green. A man named Baba and a man named Green come together and form this company and manufacturing these machines. So that is the brand name. And look how we use it. You can get more distinctive than that, you know. So these are the aspects that would normally allow for people being classified as indigenous, but the UN has never given an official definition. And just to reiterate this aspect here, They say the remaining indigenous people who continued to survive on this island, although maintaining some cultural and religious traditions, have been largely absorbed into the general population, losing much of their distinguishing qualities as a community. So, just to make the point that although they have been largely absorbed into the general population and lost most of their traditions and culture and distinguishing qualities, that doesn't change the fact that they are indigenous. That doesn't change the fact that they are the present embodiment of their ancient ancestors. They are still the indigenous ones. They are still, original to this land. They were still beget and produced by this land. This was prepared by the International Law and Human Rights Unit of the Ministry of the Attorney General. And you see the stamp there just to confirm. The stamp of the Permanent Mission at Trinidad and Tobago. This would be when they received this correspondence. So in this, they mention it is a response to this this resolution here. So I went ahead and pulled up that resolution. There's this one here. E/HRC/RES/21/24. October 11, 2012. This General Assembly resolution adopted by the Human Rights Council. And as soon as I got into it, they're going through all the rights of indigenous people, as they always expound on them. The right to this, the right to that, recognizing the importance to indigenous people of revitalizing, using, developing, and transmitting their histories, languages, oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems, and literatures to future generations, and designating and retaining their own names for communities, places, and persons. All these type of details. And one thing, right, look at here. Taking note of the study by the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous People on the Role of Language and Culture in the promotion and protection of the rights and identity of indigenous peoples, according to which cultural and language rights are indivisible and central to all the other rights. So, taking into account the significance of language and culture, the role that plays language and culture towards the identity of indigenous people. And they had a highlighted, reference marker. So I went and I looked at that one. That is this one here. One is E/HRC/21/53. We talk about paragraph 8. So I went ahead to that particular document now. That is this one here, 2153, from August. So that was a few months earlier, August of the same year. The role of language and culture in the promotion and protection of the rights and identity of indigenous people. Yeah. This is a 24-page document, going into a lot of detail. I just want to go through the table of contents to give you an idea here. Relevant international and regional standards, culture and language and the relationship to indigenous people, self-determination and rights to land, territories and resources, rights related to indigenous people, language and identity, indigenous people, cultural identity, definition of culture, collective. They always talk about indigenous people's right to their culture. This document defines culture. collective, indigenous spirituality, cultural diversity and heritage, traditional knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, and genetic resources. They're explaining all these concepts and these terminologies, what is meant by these things. Challenges faced in the promotion and protection of indigenous language and culture rights, challenges that they deal with in trying to reinforce the rights of the indigenous people to their language and their culture. So that is the kind of content in this document. So you could take a read 24 pages. I just want to go over some salient points I met in reading the document. So this is part of the introduction. This is the second chapter. Relevant international and regional standards. The declaration includes numerous provisions on protection against discriminatory and adverse treatment of indigenous people on cultural grounds, and positive measures to support indigenous people culture. So they are very much against adverse treatment and fully support on cultural grounds and positive measures to support indigenous people culture. They fully support indigenous people culture. These include rights against assimilation. Assimilation is to take up, to digest it, to eat it up, to make it part of yourself, to digest it then. That is what assimilation refers to, taking it on. So rights against assimilation, meaning that a big corporation move in on the land and start a function and just promote a certain lifestyle and cause the indigenous people to move away from their lifestyle and adopt these new concepts, rights against that. And destruction of indigenous people's culture. So they're talking about the rights that the positive measures that support indigenous people culture that this declaration is fully committed to. These include rights against assimilation and destruction of indigenous people culture, that's in Article 8, to prevention of and redress for forced assimilation, dispossession of their lands, territories, and resources. That's in Article 8. Prevention of and redress for forced assimilation. That is a focus of this declaration. Indigenous beings being dispossessed of their lands, territories, and resources. To belong to an indigenous community or nation in accordance with indigenous people's traditions and custom. The right to belong to your indigenous community and practice your customs and traditions. That's Article 9. To practice and revitalize indigenous people cultural traditions and customs. To practice and revitalize indigenous people cultural traditions and customs. That is Article 11. To teach their cultural and religious traditions and to repatriation of their human remains. That's Article 8. To revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their histories, languages, and oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems, and literatures. That's Article 13. I don't know how this could possibly happen if all the writing systems and recorded philosophies have been moved off the land and transferred to a foreign jurisdiction that is miles upon miles of ocean away. But that is a right of indigenous people. to control their own education systems and institutions, providing education in their own languages. That's Article 14 and 15. They have the right to their own education system, not forced education that would lead to their assimilation into the governing foreign jurisdiction, that has put a stranglehold on the resources, and it's not because the indigenous that go up in the bush and cut down some bamboo and get some rotten galvanized and build up something as best as they could. No. The resources of the land belong to the indigenous people. That's who it belongs to. All the resources of the land. You understand? And that is what is to be used for their priorities. Not to secure foreign investors and foreign investment, which is really just a way of siphoning the energy out. That is not the purpose of the resources of the land, so that they could set up their education system and institution, providing education in their own languages. That's Article 14 and 15. The indigenous people have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their cultural heritage, traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. That's Article 31. They have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their cultural heritage. Whatever is their cultural heritage, they have that right. That's Article 31. To determine their own identity and membership, and to promote, develop, and maintain their institutional structures and their distinctive customs, spirituality, traditions, procedures, practices, juridical systems, or customs. That's Article 34. You see the rights that indigenous people have. They have the right to their own juridical systems. This word is another word for judicial. This is law. This is law here. Just to clarify, this is law. Etymology of juridical. I want to clear up this one time. What's happening here? Juridical. Want some zoom on that. Right. Is it there? Want some more zoom? Zoom it up. Juridical. Pertaining to law. 1500 century. From Latin juridicalus, relating to right, pertaining to justice. Right, law. To see or to speak. From the PIE, Proto-Indo-European, that's how it's being used in Western society and the places on the planet that they dominate, what they call modern, that is PIE. It means to show. So judicial is a show in their system. In this modern world that we live in, judicial is a show. But from the 15th century, it pertains to law, juridical, pertaining to law, relating to right. I just wanted to clear up that. Indigenous people have the right to practice, to promote, develop, and maintain their structures relating to juridical systems or customs, relating to practices, procedures, traditions, spirituality, customs. All of these are distinctive to them. It might not meet some supposed, uniform commercial code that operating as international commercial, jurisprudence, but is really just confusion to frustrate the mind. It might meet those standards, but it is distinctive to the indigenous people, and it is their judicial system. That's in Article 34. Central to all of these rights is indigenous people's right to self-determination, which includes indigenous people's right to freely determine their cultural development, their right to autonomy, and to participate fully, if they so choose, in the political, economic, social, and cultural life of the state. Articles 3, 4, and 5. So they have full rights to self-determination and right to freely determine their cultural development, right to autonomy, and also to participate fully, if they so choose, and one would imagine partially, if they so wish, in the political, economic, social, and cultural life of the state. That is the prerogative of the indigenous being. It's not the state that determines that. That is the prerogative of the autonomous being. The indigenous people who have the rights to freely determine their cultural development. Yeah? Going on. Just touching on the highlighted ones, but it's good reading. It's very good reading. Because this one here now, cultures and languages and their relationship to indigenous peoples, self-determination and rights to land, territories, and resources. The right to culture in the context of indigenous people includes their right to self-determine their own culture and languages as an internal matter, as well as to practice and celebrate their cultures and languages in the wider public domain. That is an internal matter. That is an internal matter. That is up to the indigenous being, indigenous people. They have the right to self-determine their own culture, language as an internal matter. Yeah? And as well as to practice and celebrate their cultures in the wider public domain. That is up to them. If they choose not to, that is fine as well. If they choose to fully be, fully expose their cultures to everyone, all and sundry, that is up to them. That is what an indigenous being, as the rights of indigenous people. Indigenous people culture include their justice system, we just talk about that, and the practice thereof, as well as their right to maintain and strengthen their distinct political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions, while retaining their right to participate fully, if they so choose, in the political, economic, social, and cultural life of the state. That's Article 5. You see it there. You have all the rights. Justice system, distinct political, legal, economic. We have all these systems. We practice them. As a matter of fact, what is being described as the state, this foreign capitulation, human trafficking operation that's going on the land, they copied our thing, our operation, and all these aspects, and pollute it, suck the soul out of it, the love out of it, the growth and development aspect out of it. And it is strictly about collecting money now. All these aspects, political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions, have all been polluted by a focus on money. Right? And that is the means by which they siphon the energetic creation of the indigenous being of the land. That is Article 5, by the way. Languages are an important element and expression of indigenous peoples' right to self-determination and can facilitate the practice of indigenous peoples' self-determination. Languages, very important. Languages contain within them the tools to express indigenous collective, juridical, and political methodology and organization. We have our own words for things, and depending on the context, the same word might have a whole different meaning. And we have our system. We have our judicial system. We have our political system. We are organized. We have been. But because of domination, as I said, we're not too fully aware of all these things. In many cases, let me see if I can increase this a little more, 125. Right. In many cases, indigenous peoples have maintained their traditions orally, embedded in their languages. As some submissions to the expert mechanism stated, indigenous peoples' control over their languages can be a tool in their decolonization. Look it right there. Look it right there. As some submissions to the expert mechanism stated, indigenous peoples' control over their language can be a tool to their decolonization. That is why, this here is why we don't have it. That is why we don't have our language. That is why we don't know our culture and our traditions, because it is a tool towards decolonization. And we are being ravaged by colonials. Going on, I'm sure you could imagine after a statement like that, this paragraph here would have some very informative aspects, But there's so much crucial information in this document. I really had a hard time choosing certain aspects that I want to focus on. So I want to just try and stick to them so people will get a good general picture of the document. But, feel free. Google, you could get it. You go in the library, you could get it. Wherever, you could get it. You get it on your phone. The urbanization of many indigenous peoples, often mobilized by economic pressures and the introduction of market economies, can separate indigenous people from the land and territories where their languages and cultures are practiced, often leading to forced assimilation. So that's the same thing I was just talking about, urbanization, often, and it's not to say that indigenous people don't have a system of an economic system, a political system, a legal system that would allow for, market economies. It is just because of the pressure, economic pressure. That's why, their system is being sidelined and disregarded to the point now that the UN have to write all these documents and say, hey, these guys have the rights. You can't be trampling over them. You need to get their permission first. You need to get indigenous people permission first before you function the land. That is not me saying that, We'll reach to all of that just now. We're going on with the reading here. As the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada recently concluded, assimilationist policies were a direct assault on indigenous cultures and languages. You see? I just said it. I explained it before I read the sentence. That is a direct assault on indigenous culture. It's not about which survival of the fittest. No, it is an assault on indigenous culture. because it is a means towards colonizing and conquering. That's what it is about. Taking ownership. Yes. Definition of culture. We use this word so much. Indigenous peoples' culture include tangible and intangible manifestations of their ways of life. So it's everything.
Right. So we're going on here. Indigenous. Right. Indigenous people culture. Well, this is culture, definition of culture here. What is this? Right. Indigenous peoples' culture include tangible and intangible manifestations of their ways of life. Achievements and creativity are an expression of their self-determination and of their spiritual and physical relationships with their lands, territories, and resources. So it includes tangible and intangible manifestations of their ways of life. So everything you could touch and everything you can't touch. So everything. Manifestations of their ways of life, achievements, creativity are an expression of their self-determination and of their spiritual and physical relationships with their lands, territories, and resources. It is crucial. Indigenous culture is a holistic concept based on common material and spiritual values and includes distinctive manifestations in language, spirituality, membership, arts, literature, traditional knowledge, customs, rituals, ceremonies, methods of production, festive events, music, sports, and traditional games, behavior, habits, tools, shelter, clothing, economic activities, morals, value systems, cosmovision, your dreams and all, laws. Look at right here. That is part of the culture. And activities such as hunting, fishing, trapping, and gathering. And seeing about relatives and going in the market and you know meeting up and having a get together and all the other aspects of activities. This is not the only thing that indigenous people do. That is what we used to do. But we're doing some other things right now. Not because we're not doing these things, it means we're not indigenous. You understand? There was a time that is what we was doing. That other times we was doing other things. Just as now we're doing different things. Indigenous cultures are influenced by the environment, impacting on a people's common perspective of the world and underlining its connection with nature. Indigenous cultures shape their views of the world and life. Remember, I did a video on the etymology of the word indigenous. Nowhere in that it talk about this type of image that we have of indigenous. This is some of the activities, such as probably the best activities to be engaged in really. Because we want to be working for people and they should pay you anyhow. So at the end of the day, not because a boy get caught up in a slave order and now catching back himself and he mightn't be too versed on these things, it means he not indigenous. Because when you check the etymology of the word indigenous, it have nothing to do with this. Pull it up one time. Look at right here. Indigenous. Born or originating in a particular place. That is the gist of it there. Born or originating in a particular place. You know, they take this word and give it a whole different meaning. You know, talking about ships and boating ships, ships boating on a dock, and they create a document for the baby, and they do a whole such a mischief, corporate fraud. But this, we know what this means, incarnate, eh? Incarnate might be a better word. Incarnate, embodied in flesh, in human or bodily form. That is all we know for sure, really, you know. That is all we really know for sure. You know, we ain't sure about anything else. Nothing wrong with believing anything, you know. But at the end of the day, it's quite evident that it has some kind of spiritual essence that moving the body, controlling the body, manipulating it, and it has some connection to some force that, or some energy that don't exist on this plane. That much is, we know that. It have evidence of when somebody at the point of passing, the body lose 7 grams, I think, 7 grams of mass, the body lose. And when they put beings in a zone, you know, under surveillance to scan for that electric energy, check for that. They see it raise off the body, and that's on YouTube, So they notice that there's a electric energy that embodies the flesh, and that is all we know for sure. Come here to have an experience, and it has nothing to do with working for people who do have no sense of how to do business. Going on to our next highlighted point here, an important component of indigenous people. I'll take off this first. Remove. An important component of indigenous people's rights to their cultural heritage is their right to the repatriation of ceremonial objects and human remains. That is Article 12, which requires the cooperation of the places where such objects and remains were stored, such as museums. It requires the cooperation. Not the indigenous people that full out our form. No. It requires the cooperation of the places where the remains are being stored, and stored is such a politically correct word to use for that, such as museums. They have artifacts from this island in German and Norwegian museums. That is how far they're storing these things from us. All over the planet. We didn't reach there. Reach there, you have time to go in the museum. That is where they have our stuff, and telling me they know. You know, telling me that the Magnificent Seven, those buildings there and Independent, only Savannah in town, Port of Spain. Some men come and build them thing all within the space of 5 years. Come on. In the space of 5 years, all them thing went up. All them building, and then they just stop build. They never build the next one after that. Make it make sense now. They have all our records. The jig is up. Let's move on. So moving on to the next one here now. Recognition of indigenous peoples' cultures. In some states, indigenous peoples are required to provide evidence of their historical connections to their lands, territories, and resources. To obtain formal and official recognition of their rights to these lands, territories, and resources. So in some states, it is required that indigenous provide evidence in order to, to prove that they have historical connection to the land before they could obtain official formal recognition of their rights to the land, territory, and resources. Okay? Imposing such evidential burdens on indigenous peoples is costly and difficult, especially where they were colonized and had lost their lands, territories, and resources. Well, they say many centuries in the past. They're trying to make it, seem like it's so long ago, so it could be hard to do. There's a kind of emotive kind of language. This part here, many centuries ago. What that does that have to do with anything? Because some of the things moved last year. They're still moving things. So it started many centuries ago, but it's still going on. So what do you mean by that? But anyhow, we know. So in places where they were colonized, they lost their records. Not that it destroyed, but it was stolen. Because they can't destroy them thing. There are also significant threats to indigenous cultures when they are subjected to imposed legal evidentiary tests that require the inappropriate public sharing of cultural heritage. Yeah? That is unnecessary. You know where you get it though. You take up the man thing and asking for proof now, but you know where you get it, sir. The right to equality. Unique, no, and in many cases, let me take off this first. In many cases, and especially where indigenous peoples are not dominant in the state within which they are located, they may find it difficult to protect their cultures as compared with non-indigenous dominant groups. Yeah? Because they're being dominated. Non-indigenous dominant groups can better reflect their cultural preferences in law and policy to which indigenous peoples are subjugated, because the non-indigenous dominant groups are the ones who created the law and policies. It's not actually law, is a Constitution Act, and this act has all these acts as part of it. All these rules, regulations, policies, acts. Now they're even going so bold to call themselves actors. They are literally saying they are actors. It's not me come up with that name. They say they are actors. And they perform acts. And all these law and policies that they're claiming is really regulations for a private corporation that they are running on the land. A private human trafficking corporation. So non-indigenous dominant groups can better reflect their cultural preferences in law and policy to which indigenous peoples are subjugated. At the same time, it must be recognized that indigenous peoples' rights should not be conceptualized as special measures, but instead as distinct and permanent rights. It's not a special situation, it's not special measures. It's not a blind eye again on the road when the police wave me through. It's distinct and permanent rights to all the indigenous people. That whole process about with driving, and you have to have a permit, and you have to have insurance, and it's like, I just went on the road there and it occurred to me, how come people just be able to walk on the road without a permit? They just be on the same road, they just follow the same rules with the traffic light and, you know, the part of the traffic. How come men on bicycle don't have to have a permit? You know, how come dogs, stray dogs, walking the streets don't have to have a permit? And they using the supposed government road the same way? So a dog on the street road have more freedom than me then. A bird, you know, a manikou have more rights than me. That is all they're saying. Make it make sense now. Why I have to go through all of that? You know? It don't make any sense. You're saying that you need the permit because it's a part of a process where you just learn to drive. But I mean, no God, we know now. The place too small for them kind of talk. We know, we know that zone is run down the road, the licensing office. If you know how to drive, crap will smoke your pipe down there. You know? It's just capitulation. Let's get over it. It's how much years now it's going on. You know? It's boring now. It's boring. Indigenous people need to get control of the resources so they could, you know, resurrect this life, you know, and send it on a path to growth and development and production. It's not no hard work and man's living for sufferation. You know, it's not that. We're moving towards is betterment now. It's time for that. This capitulation is why the life the way it is. This is our paradise. All them books and thing when they reach here. When Columbus was passing Moruga there, he write in the book, you know, he tell the king of Portugal that, my lord, I think I have reached the land as described of in as the Garden of Eden. He was passing by Moruga. Hear what I'm saying, you know? When he was passing by Moruga, he say it looked like he in the Garden of Eden. You dig? So life can be it can be so hard. Indigenous peoples' cultures should, as UNESCO policy provides, be at the center of the development of their lands, territories, and resources, which in most cases requires their participation and consent. Development of their land is based on their participation and consent. As ILO Convention number 169, this is a powerful document here. This document is enforceable as law, you know. And they create a little mischief in the UN there where they say, initially when all the nations join the UN and create the UN, that once you join, you gotta follow everything what we decide inside here. You know, we go debate it out, and we go reach a understanding, and all must be in agreement, because once you join here, this is how we functioning. That is how the UN start. Once you are a member, resolutions are to be followed. Somewhere along the line now, it turned into who signed, who was there when the signing was going on, who was not wrong and men didn't sign, so them had to follow it, and it turned into that. That is why I talk about how they pollute they take the indigenous concepts, indigenous stuff, processes, systems, and reconfigure it to run some taxation. They pollute it to run taxation. So because the whole of South America signed, and Central America, I think it's just about 2 countries, Uruguay and somewhere else, didn't sign in the South America and Central America zone, because they generally sign, but this island didn't sign. right across the water there. When you go down in Carcass and you just cross that water and you go across, the indigenous have full 100, full rank. Like I know a man was in the prison system and he tell me it have a section inside there for indigenous, no, for meet up with some men inside there. And the men when he tell the men that he indigenous, the men was like, what? And you inside here? Them mad, boy. You're not supposed to be inside here. They know. They know the power that the word indigenous have right across on the mainland there. But right here, we have a schooling that we get that we is not that. Indigenous have a certain look. This functioning, once we be rid ourselves of the poison, it will take a while to cleanse out, you know. But the sooner we start, the better. So getting back to this one, as the ILO Convention number 169 provides, indigenous peoples shall have the right to decide their own priorities for the process of development as it affects their lives, beliefs, institutions, and spiritual well-being, and the lands they occupy or otherwise use, and to exercise control to the extent possible over their own economic, social, and cultural development. You see that? That's Article 7. Yeah. The Human Rights Committee has confirmed that economic development may not undermine the rights protected by the right to culture. The Human Rights Committee has confirmed that economic development may not undermine the rights protected by the right to culture. You can't see that we look into what? Progress, that's the word they like to use. How much years are progress? Since 1976, we progressing. Yeah? Because of progress, because of economic development, that may not undermine the rights protected by the right to indigenous culture. That was confirmed. In case you wasn't sure. That is not me who made this document. This is the UN Rights of Indigenous People. Oh Lord, I'm trying to take all this. Right. Assimilation. The perceived threat of indigenous cultures to national identity has led many states to counterfactually deny the existence of indigenous people and to implement policies directed at assimilating them into mainstream society. Assimilation of indigenous peoples and individuals into mainstream cultures is a violation of international human rights law, and especially indigenous peoples and individuals' right to culture. It is a violation to assimilate indigenous people into mainstream culture. It's a violation. You know, there's a perceived threat that indigenous culture is a threat to national identity. This concept we have of, Trinidad is a nation. A nation is a group of tribes. That's what a nation is. A tribe is a group of people who have a common agenda, working with a order, than a mission. There's a tribe. And a group of these tribes is a nation. You can throw people together in an island, lock them off from leaving, a boat sailing around with big guns on it, and have them block off that they can't leave. Tell them you're not sure where they come from, but they think you come from there, and they think you come from Dua, D and Dua. And Go ahead and walk now. Go ahead and walk. And here's a nation. No, it's not a nation. That is not a nation. You could say it how loud you want. You could make the flag as big as you want and put it on the tallest pole you could find. It is not a nation. A nation is a group of tribes. And not because we don't know, it means that we will just have to work with that now. Bring the records forward. Bring all the records. Teach them that in school. Teach them who they are, who they came from. That is what we need to teach them. Anyhow, the perceived threat of indigenous culture to national identity has led to many states to counterfactually deny the existence of indigenous people. I want to. Wait, is. Let me see if I could find this here. This document that I started this video with. If I could find that and just point out make a very important point there. Alright. Right. This document here. This was started the conversation. They talk here. This is the document from the permanent mission. So you see what is going on is a mission, and it apparently permanent. The permanent mission of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. That is the name of it, and that is the purpose. It's a mission. It's border fighting. So this mission write a letter to the UN, and in it they were describing the best they know about indigenous. They don't know much. That is all they know. And I just want to touch on this part of it. Historically, it has been recorded that the Amerindians were wiped out through slavery, war, and disease as a result of the more powerful and resourceful Spanish immigrant settlers. So you could clearly see if the government was making a bet, who they would have, who they was betting for. You could clearly see, because one set was more powerful and resourceful because they used slavery, war, and disease to wipe them out. That is the crucial thing I wanted to talk about. They were wiped out. The remaining few, wait, they didn't get wiped out again. The remaining few who continue to survive, although maintaining some cultural and religious traditions, have been largely absorbed into the general population, losing much of their distinguishing qualities as a community. So they don't know there's a bunch of Amerindians. They don't know that. But that is the only thing they don't know. They tuning back into all their cultural aspects, historical cultural aspects. So they were wiped out at first, and then it had a few remaining. And I checked the etymology of the word few. Let me see what the word few mean. Few means not many, small number, not many. Or few could mean many. Meaning many. Always in Old English, according to OED, on the analogy of adverbial fella meaning many. You could get the phrase quite a few, meaning quite a many. A good few, meaning many. So few could mean many, or few could mean a little. So the remaining many, because we just see them for carnival on the street, so we can know is a remaining many
who continue to survive, although maintaining some cultural and religious traditions, have been largely absorbed into the general population. So they just don't tell them who they are. That is why they were absorbed. So getting back to the reading, you could see how the state uses counterfactual facts to deny the existence of indigenous people and to implement policies, rules, regulations, and acts directed at assimilating them into mainstream society. They're making up a thing. Assimilation of indigenous peoples and individuals into mainstream cultures is a violation of international human rights law and especially indigenous people and individuals' right to culture. Indigenous people's right to engage in economic activities associated with their culture. Indigenous people's economic activities embody much of their culture and often involve the application of their knowledge, skills, technologies, and values as passed down to them by their ancestors. They may also contain information about the sustainable use of the natural environment. This is economic activities we're talking about. Is the application of knowledge, skill, technology, and values as passed down by the ancestors and may also contain information about the sustainable use of the natural environment. Yeah, that is how indigenous people just run their operations. That is how they just do business. That is how we just function. You know? That is how the old people used to do it. Expert mechanism advice number 3. Indigenous, I'm going to take off the highlights so I can highlight. Indigenous cultures include their ways of life, protected by the right to self-determination, and indigenous peoples' relationships, including spiritual connections with their lands, territories, and resources. They include manifestation of cultural practices, including economically driven activity, traditional knowledge, cultural expressions, jurisprudence, cosmovision, spirituality, philosophies, membership codes, dispute resolution techniques, social values, art, dress, song, and dance. That is what indigenous culture include, and this is what it would be described as, this is what makes it up, all these different aspects. Economically driven activity, where does do? The only first thing people just ask you, where does do? Traditional knowledge, we know, traditional knowledge. That things people just know. They just know in their heart. There's the way the thing had to be. But again, domination, assimilation, urbanization, It don't have to be that way. We have enough resources. We don't need everything have to be in one zone and one thing in town and in the capital and every day everybody fighting to reach down there. It don't have to be that way. I ain't talking about no mama guy thing or the set up thing just to run a racket for a few years and then go back to it how it was before. Proper infrastructure. Proper infrastructure. We have the biggest pitch lake on the planet. They include manifestation
of cultural practices, including economically driven activity, traditional knowledge, cultural expression, jurisprudence, that is law, cosmovisions, anything you could imagine, spirituality, a connection to the Most High, philosophies, membership codes, dispute resolution techniques, social values, arts, dress, song and dance. It had this tribe in Africa they call the Dogon. Them boys still get to function in the ways of the old. So when the invaders went in there, look into the lock zone, the Dogon explained, carry them and show them some things about their culture. And they have a system where every 60 years, the chief would, or the priest, would do a ritual where he go take some notes of things about what going on, and he would record his thoughts. And he would also build a chair. That is part of the process. He built in a chair. And he would sit on the chair and do his ritual. Whereas every 60 years. This is when the constellation Orion, our group of stars in that Sirius A, B, and C. And every 60 years, they just have a certain alignment in relation to Venus. And he does do the priest, the head priest, will do a ritual for that every 60 years. And the chair that he built now, that being housed in a structure that is just for that. And that structure have 12 chairs. So when you check the time, you check the time being recorded there. There's 12 chairs in the room. Each chair is 60 years, so it's 720 years of knowledge this room have in it. Each chair carrying a 60-year period. When they go in the back and show them, it had 2 more buildings like that down in the back. So that is 3 times 720. So you see how time being recorded. And just an indigenous way now. Without any big thing, it might just be end up being a Bram, because every 60 years he going and do this. It's really eats and drinks going to take place for that. So it's a line. But it's part of a process of recording time and on a certain schedule too that have a relation to alignment of stars. Stars is energy, is light. You're seeing light because it's energy emanating from that point, wherever it is, whatever it is light coming. That is what they talk about angels. It's really angles of light they're talking about, because these lights coming at you on a certain cycle, on a certain pattern that have an effect on you. They have a cycle, they're moving on, and it having a cyclic effect on you. I mean, a whole different cycle right now. The Piscean cycle done when the Aquarian age now. So it's a whole different energy now. Now the truth coming out. Because them signed this since 2012. This one? Not this one. I'll check the date just now. But these are the protections that they have for indigenous people, their own culture, practice their culture, without any inhibitions, unless they see it fit to do that. So that is all I highlighted in this document, because I try not to have the videos go too long. But this document could easily be sourced off the internet,
And people can read it and get a full understanding of what the rights of indigenous people and the rights of the people of the land, the inhabitants of the land, entails. And we could move towards living a life that we are enjoying our rights, not privileges, not policies, not acts, regulations, but rights. Notice the agent is notice the principle. Notice the principle is notice the agent. Wadu,